Chapter 15. After that evening, I became a regular and welcome visitor at Lord Elton's house, and was soon on terms the most friendly intimacy with all the members of his family, including even the severely pious Miss Charlotte Fitzroy. It was not difficult for me to see that my matrimonial aspirations were suspected, and though the encouragement I received from Lady Sybil herself was so slight as to make me doubtful whether, after all, my hopes of winning her would ever be realized, the Earl made no secret of his delight at the idea of securing me as a son-in-law. Such wealth as mine was not to be met with every day, and even had I been a blackleg of the turf or a retired jockey instead of an author, I should, with 5 million at my back, have been considered quite a desirable suitor for Lady Sybil's hand. Romanes scarcely ever went with me to the Eltons now, pleading as an excuse much pressing business and many social engagements. I was not altogether sorry for this. Greatly as I admired and honored him, his extraordinary physical beauty and fascination of manner were in dangerous contrast to my merely ordinary, good-looking personality, and it seemed to me impossible that any woman, seeing much of him, could be expected to give me the preference. All the same, I had no fear that he would ever voluntarily become my rival. His antipathy to women was too deep-rooted and sincere for that. On this point, indeed, his feelings were so strong and passionate that I often wondered why society sirens who eagerly courted his attention remained so blind and unconscious to the chill cynicism that lurked beneath his seeming courtesy. The cutting satire that was coupled with apparent compliment, the intensity of hatred that flamed under the assumed expression of admiring homage in his flashing eyes. However, it was not my business to point out to those who could not, or would not, see the endless peculiarities of my friend's variable dispositions. I did not pay much heed to them even so far as myself was concerned, for I had grown accustomed to the quick changes he was wont to ring on all the gamut of human feelings, and absorbed in my own life schemes, I did not trouble myself intimately study the man who had in a couple of months become my fidus Achaeus. I was engrossed at the moment in doing all I could to increase the Earl of Elton's appreciative sense of my value as a man and a millionaire. And to this end I paid some of his pressing debts, lent him a large sum of money without demanding interest or the promise of repayment, and stocked his cellar with presents of such rare old wines as he had not been able to afford to purchase for himself for many years. Thus was confidence easily engendered between us, even to that point of affection which displayed itself in his lordship's readiness to thrust his arm through mine when we sauntered together down Piccadilly, and his calling me "my dear boy" in public. Never shall I forget the bewildered amazement of the scrubby little editor of a sixpenny magazine who met me face to face thus accompanied in the park one morning. That he knew the Earl of Elton by sight was evident, and that he also knew me his apoplectic stare confessed. He had pompously refused to even read any of my offered contributions on the grounds that I had no name. And now he would have given a month's salary if I had but condescended to recognize him. I did not so condescend, but passed him by, listening to and laughing with my intended future father-in-law, who was retailing an extremely ancient joke for my benefit. The incident was slight, even trumpery, yet it put me in a good humor, for one of the chiefest pleasures I had out of my wealth was the ability to repay with vengeful interest all the contempt and insult that had beaten me back from every chance of earning a livelihood while I was poor. In all my visits to the Eltons, I never saw the paralyzed countess again. Since the last terrible visitation of her dread disease, she had not moved. She merely lived and breathed, no more. Lord Elton told me that the worst part of her illness at present, so far as it affected those who had to attend upon her, was a particularly hideous alteration of her face. "The fact is," he said, not without a shudder, "she's dreadful to look at. Positively dreadful. No longer human, you know. She used to be a lovely woman. Now she is literally frightful. Her eyes especially. They are as scared and wild as if she had seen the devil. Quite an awful expression, I assure you. And it never alters. The doctors can do nothing. And, of course, it's very trying for Sybil. And everybody." I assented sympathetically, and realizing that a house holding such a figure of living death within it must of necessity be more or less gloomy and depressing to a young and vigorous nature, I lost no opportunity of giving Lady Sybil whatever slight pleasures were in my power to procure, for her distraction and entertainment: costly flowers, boxes for the opera, and first nights at the play, every sort of attention that a man can pay to a woman without being considered officious or intrusive I offered, and was not repulsed. Everything progressed well and favorably towards the easy attainment of my wishes. I had no difficulties, no troubles of any kind, and I voluntarily led a life of selfish, absorbed personal gratification, being commended and encouraged therein by a whole host of flatterers and interested acquaintances. Willowsmere Court was mine, and every newspaper in the kingdom had commented on the purchase in either servile or spiteful paragraphs. My lawyers had warmly congratulated me on the possession of so admirable a property, which they, in strict accordance with what they conceived to be their duty, had personally inspected and approved. The place was now in the hands of a firm of decorators and furnishers, recommended by Romanes, and it was expected to be in perfect order for my habitation in early summer, at which time I purposed entertaining a large house party of more or less distinguished people. Meantime, what I had once considered would be the great event of my life took place, namely the publication of my book. Trumpeted forth by the most heraldic advertisements, it was at last launched on an uncertain and fluctuating tide of public favor, and special advance copies were sent to the office of every magazine and journal in London. The day after this was done, Lucio, as I now familiarly called him, came into my room with a mysterious and mischievous air. "Geoffrey," he said, "I'm going to lend you £500. I looked up with a smile. "What for?" He held out a cheque towards me. Glancing at it, I saw the sum he mentioned was filled in and endorsed with his signature, but that the name of the person to whom the money was to be made payable had not yet been written. "Well, what does it mean?" "It means," he replied, "that I am going to see Mr. McWing this morning. I have an appointment with him at 12. You, as Geoffrey Tempest, the author of the book Mr. McWing is going to criticize and make a boom of, could not possibly put your name to such a cheque. It would not be good form. It might crop up afterwards and so betray the secrets of the prison house. But for me, it is another affair. I am going to pose as your businessman, your literary agent, who pockets 10% of the profits and wants to make a big thing out of you, and I am going to talk the matter over with a perfectly practical McWing, who has, like every true Scot, a keen eye for the main chance. Of course, it will be in confidence, strict confidence," and he laughed. "It's all a question of business, you know. In these commercial days, literature has become a trade like everything else, and even critics only work for what pays them. As indeed, why should they not?" "Do you mean to tell me McWing will take that 500?" I asked dubiously. "I mean to tell you nothing of the kind. I would not put the matter so coarsely for the world. This money is not for McWing. It is for a literary charity." "Indeed! I thought you had an idea perhaps of offering a bribe." "A bribe? Good heavens! Bribe a critic? Impossible, my good Geoffrey. Such a thing was never heard of. Never, never, never." And he shook his head and rolled up his eyes with infinite solemnity. "No, no, press people never take money for anything, not even for booming a good gold mine company, not even for putting a notice of a fashionable concert into the Morning Post. Everything in the English press is just expression of pure and lofty sentiment. Believe me, this little cheque for a charity of which Mr. McWing is chief patron— you see the civil list pensions go by favor to the wrong persons nowadays— to the keeping of lunatic versifiers and retired actresses who never could act. The actual bona fide geniuses never get anything out of government, and moreover would scorn to take a farthing from that pernicious body which grudges him anything higher than a money recognition. It is as great an insult to offer a beggarly pension of £50 or £100 a year to a really great writer as to give him a knighthood, and we cannot fall much lower than to be a knight, as knights go. The present £500 will help relieve certain poor and proud but pressing literary cases known to McWing alone." His expression at this moment was so extraordinary that I failed entirely to fathom it. "I have no doubt I shall be able to represent the benevolent and respectable literary agent to perfection. Of course, I shall insist on my 10%. And he began laughing again. But you can't stop to discuss the matter now with you. I'm off. I promised McWing to be with him at 12 o'clock precisely, and it's now 11:30. I shall probably lunch with him, so don't wait for me. And concerning the 500, you needn't be in my debt an hour longer than you like. I'll take a check for the money back from you this evening. All right, I said, but perhaps the great oracle of the cliques will reject your proposal with scorn. If he does, then Utopia realized, replied Lucio, carefully drawing on his gloves as he spoke. Where's a copy of your book? Ah, here's one, smelling newly of the press. And he slipped the volume into his overcoat pocket. Allow me, before departure, to express the opinion that you are a singularly ungrateful fellow, Geoffrey. Here I am, perfectly devoted to your interests, and despite my princedom, actually prepared to pose to McWing as your acting manager pro tem. And you haven't so much a thank you to throw at me? He stood before me smiling, the personification of kindness and good humor. I laughed a little. McWing will never take you for the acting manager or literary agent, I said. You don't look it. If I seem churlish, I'm sorry, but the fact is I am disgusted. Of what? He inquired, still smiling. Oh, at the humbug of everything, I answered impatiently. The stupid farce of it all. Why shouldn't a book get noticed on its own merits, without any appeal to cliquism and influential wire-pulling on the press? Exactly. And he delicately flicked a grain of dust off his coat while speaking. And why shouldn't a man get received in society on his own merits, without any money to recommend him or any influential friend to back him up? I was silent. The world is as it is made, he went on, regarding me fixedly. It is moved by the lowest and pettiest motives. It works for the most trivial, ridiculous, and perishable aims. It is not a paradise. It is not a happy family of united and affectionate brethren. It is an overpopulated colony of jabbering and quarrelsome monkeys who fancy they are men. Philosophers in old days tried to teach it that the monkey type should be exterminated for the growth and encouragement of a nobler race, but they preached in vain. There were never enough real men alive to overcome the swarming majority of the beasts. God himself, they say, came down from heaven to try and set wrong things right, and to restore, if possible, his own defaced image to the general aspect of humanity, and even he failed. There's very little God in this world, I said bitterly. There's much more devil. He smiled, a musing, dreamy smile that transfigured his countenance and made him look like a fine Apollo absorbed in the thought of some new and glorious song. No doubt, he said, after a little pause, mankind certainly prefer the devil to any other deity. Therefore, if they elect him as their representative, it is scarcely to be wondered at that he governs where he is asked to govern. And yet, do you know, Geoffrey, this devil, if there is one, can hardly, I think, be quite so bad as his detractors say. I myself don't believe he is a whit worse than a 19th century financier. I laughed aloud at the comparison. After that, I said, you had better go to McWing. I hope you will tell him that I am the triple essence of all the newest discoveries rolled into one. Never fear, returned Lucio. I've learned all the stock phrases by heart. A star of the first magnitude, etc. I've read the Antheum, till I've got the lingo of the literary auctioneer well nigh perfect, and I believe I shall acquit myself admirably. Au revoir. He was gone, and I, after a little desultory looking over my papers, went out to lunch at Arthur's, of which club I was now a member. On my way I stopped to look in at a bookseller's window to see if my immortal production was yet on show. It was not, and the volume put most conspicuously to the front among all the newest books was one entitled Differences by Mavis Clare. Acting on a sudden impulse, I went in to purchase it. Has this a good sale? I asked, as the volume was handed to me. The clerk at the counter opened his eyes wide. Sale? He echoed. Well, I should think so, rather. Why, everyone's reading it. Indeed, and I turned over the uncut pages carelessly. I see no allusion whatever to it in the papers. The clerk smiled and shrugged his shoulders. No, you're not likely to, sir, he said. Miss Clare is too popular to need reviews. Besides, a large number of critics, the log rulers especially, are mad against her for her success, and the public knows it. Only the other day a man came in here from one of the big newspaper offices and told me he was taking a few notes on the book which had the largest sales. Would I tell him which author's work was most in demand? I said Miss Clare's book took the lead, as she does, and he got into a regular rage. He said, "That's the answer I've had all along the line, and however true it is, it's no use to me because I dare not mention it. My editor would instantly scratch it out. He hates Miss Clare." "A precious editor you've got," I said, and he looked rather queer. "There's nothing like journalism, sir, for the suppression of truth." I smiled and went away with my purchase, convinced that I had wasted a few shillings on a mere piece of women's trash. If this Mavis Clare was indeed so popular, then her work must naturally be of the penny dreadful order, for I, like many other literary men, laboured under the ludicrous inconstancy of considering the public an ass, while I myself desired nothing so much as the said ass's applause and approval, and therefore I could not imagine it capable of voluntarily selecting for itself any good work of literature without guidance from the critics. Of course, I was wrong. The great masses of the public in all nations are always led by some instinctive sense of right that moves them to reject the false and unworthy and select the true. Completely prepared, like most men of my type, to sneer and cavil at the book, chiefly because it was written by a feminine hand, I sat down in a retired corner of the club reading room and began to cut and skim the pages. I had not read many sentences before my heart sank with a heavy sense of fear and jealousy. The slow fire of an insidious envy began to smolder in my mind. What power had so gifted this author, this mere woman, that she should dare to write better than I, and that she should force me, by the magic of her pen, to mentally acknowledge, albeit with wrath and shame, my own inferiority? Clearness of thought, brilliance of style, beauty of diction, all these were her, united to consummate ease of expression and artistic skill. And all at once, in the very midst of reading, such violent impulse of insensate rage possessed me that I flung the book down, dreading to go on with it. The potent, resistless, unpurchasable quality of genius! Ah, I was not yet so blinded by my own conceit as to be unable to recognize that divine fire when I saw it flashed up from the every page as I saw it now. But to be compelled to give that recognition to a woman's work galled and irritated me almost beyond endurance. Women, I considered, should be kept in their places as men's drudges or toys, as wives, mothers, nurses, cooks, menders of socks and shirts, and housekeepers generally. What right had they to intrude into the realms of art and snatch the laurels from their masters' brows? If I could but get the chance of reviewing this book, I thought to myself savagely, I would misquote, misrepresent, and cut it to shreds with a joy too great for words. This Mavis Clare, unsexed, as I had once called her in my own mind, simply because she had the power I lacked, wrote what she had to say with a gracious charm, freedom, and innate consciousness of strength, a strength which forced me back upon myself and filled me with the bitterest humiliation. Without knowing her, I hated her, this woman who could win fame without the aid of money, who was crowned so brightly and visibly to the world that she was beyond criticism. I took up her book again and tried to cavil at it. Over one or two dainty bits of poetic simile and sentiment I laughed enviously. When I left the club later in the day, I took the book with me, divided between a curious desire to read it honestly through with justice to it and its author, and the impulse to tear it asunder and fling it into the road to be crushed in the mud under rolling cab and cart wheels. In this strange humor Romanes found me, when at about 4 o'clock he returned from his mission to David McWing, smiling and triumphant.